part 2 of our speaker series today on future of cities. We had a great chat with Larry Chan this morning, who did some really interesting dives into different aspects of sort of architecture and the influence of architecture in the cities and all the different components that are connected to it, and sort of some of the issues that were highlighted with our public spaces as a result of COVID. So now we're moving on to Tom Van Arman, who's joining us from Amsterdam. Cool, from across the pond.
That's right.
Thank you.
I have my Kolsch to prove it. Yeah.
Anna Katrin, take it away.
Yep, I'll take it from here. Well, so I'm really thrilled to have Tom join us. I think we had a good kickoff this morning, and to talk, a lot of things came up that I think you will be asked, Tom, that were brought up this morning about smart cities already. And I'm glad to see everybody back here. So welcome back to all the teams. And a few words about Tom. So first of all, Tom is a Wentworth graduate, and we have collaborated on study abroad courses in the last few years, which is might not be happening this year, but it's wonderful to have you on campus through Zoom, at least, seeing that we can't have that beer in Amsterdam in person right now, which is unfortunate. So Tom Van Arman is an architect and urbanist using open data, APIs, and Internet of Things solutions to create more social, sustainable, and resilient cities, all topics I really do want to talk about today. In 2010, he founded Tapp, an award-winning agency enabling local governments and industries to become leaders in bottom-up digital revolution. Using agile and lean startup methodologies, Tapp works with public and private partners to rapid prototype solutions to solve urgent urban problems. In 2018, he co-founded CITIXL, City Innovation Exchange Lab, to share solutions with municipal partners from around the world. By utilizing living labs, city officials can reduce risks and costs while empowering their citizens to co-create easy, simple, and effective solutions for a more participatory process to think, create, share, and nurture future cities. So Tom, take it away. All this we want to talk about and see what you're up to. Thank you for being here. Welcome to FutureLab.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much, Anne-Katrin. Great introduction. Yeah, I think if it's okay if I just put just one question. Who am I talking to today? Are these architecture students, urban design, or a mixed bag? Or just I want to make sure that I'm customizing and tailoring the messages so it's meaningful and purposeful for
we have a lot of architecture students, but we also have computer science and computer networking students, and I believe even applied mathematics.
Awesome.
So
perfect.
You have it's exactly your type of people, all of them.
My cup of tea. Yeah, perfect. Right up my alley. Perfect. That's important. So just if I can just 2 minutes as a kind of, I think context is always important. So yes, my name is Tom Van Arman. It's a Dutch name, but I'm actually from Vermont, and I realized that if I want to study architecture and urbanism and urban planning, that I couldn't do that in the mountains of Vermont. I needed to do that in Boston at Wentworth, and so I graduated in 1999 from the architecture department, and then moved to the Architectural Association in London to get my urban degree. And then from there, I had this wonderful kind of overview of which cities were doing some really interesting stuff. And so Amsterdam was one of those kinds of movements that were going on called the Super Dutch, which was about multi-use, density, and multi-purpose modular designs. And I wanted to learn as much as I could from the Dutch at that moment, so it was the turn of the century. And I've been here ever since. So wonderful 10 years working for architecture firms and urban design firms. But then all of a sudden, the financial crisis of the last crisis, 2008 and 9, hit us pretty hard as well as everybody. And that basically threw all of the foreign designers out on the street, and we're all scratching our heads. Well, what do we do now? What's our role? What's our purpose? And then of course Steve Jobs entered the stage and introduced the world to the smartphone. And I'm like, ooh, wait a minute. What happens if we all have those things in our pocket? We would have whole new insights to design future cities. And so from 2010 until now, about 10 years, I've been working with cities, private and public partners, knowledge institutions, governments, municipalities, to really start exploring what these future city concepts are. And focused mostly on 3 domains, which is smart energy, future mobility, and city data. And Amsterdam has been a wonderful kind of home base for me for the last 2 years to really have to take the liberties and licenses to explore these concepts collectively. So that means not just in terms of the business and the technology viabilities, but also what the social impacts are. And that's the most important thing, is that right now we're in this kind of new era, this new world where all of this technology is flooding the market right now, and now it's spilling over to our common spaces, our collective spaces, our social spaces. And we need to keep things in check, because we don't want to be making the same mistakes we did with the internet offline, right? So that for me is has been important. So what I want to do is just for the next 20 minutes, just kind of blaze through just 3 projects that I've been working on since 2020. So in other words, this year, and these are all relevant to the moment that we're in, and which is the age of Corona. And there's this. I'm trying to share my screen now. Speaker view, yes, and then I go to. Can I share my screen now? I think I'm going to try.
It should, yeah, I think it should still be possible. Go ahead.
Okay,
yep,
cool.
We can see that.
You can see it? Great.
Yes.
Great. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to share some of my insights, some of my experiences tackling Corona, because I love this concept of FutureLab, everything that we're going to be doing now, and that it's all of us, these what Anne-Catherine and Monique are doing, and what these students are doing is we're in a kind of laboratory right now, whether we like it or not, and it's all about experimentation and testing to really understand what's working for our cities and citizens and what's not. So I think what's happened with Corona is that it's kind of created this brand new frontier that that we need to claim. We need to start planting our flags and really understanding this new space that's been created. We need to really start understanding what our role is in this, because this is an urgent problem that's going to be around for the next couple of years, if not longer. So don't listen to Trump. It's not going to magically disappear. It's going to be here for a while. And now it's creating this new kind of norm. Things won't go back to things that they were back in what, I don't know when you guys started your lockdown. We started beginning of March. But things won't return to the January, February standards. It's radically transformed our lifestyle, radically transformed our way of thinking, and so we need to really embrace this new space that's been created for us and understand what impacts they have on our jobs, our designs, our way of thinking, our way of behaving. And so we're now entering a kind of new transition period. So here in the Netherlands, we're slowly rebooting. We're doing it very, very, very carefully. And so the projects I'm about to show you are examples of how to understand what that means for design, urban design, for architecture, for safety, for security, for health. And I'm going to try to do this in 3 projects. So next Monday, the terraces will be open, the movie theaters will be open, restaurants, all the things are going to be slowly coming online with maximum capacities. And so some of the questions I have are like, what are those capacities? And so we need to start measuring things to better understand them. As Bloomberg would have said, if you're not measuring, then you're not managing. And I think that's, whether you like Bloomberg or not, it's kind of true, especially these days with in the digital kind of era that we're in, that we can easily start mapping things, measuring things in a way to give us insights to make more informed decisions. So I'm going to talk about 3 projects. One is a project that started not way before, but just on the footstep of the coronavirus. And so this is the point cloud scanning that was in January. And then a project that's still ongoing, but it's super important now. But we were developing it during the lockdown, which is we're calling it the world's first open source crowd monitor. And the third one is just for fun, as we enter this new transition phase, that I wanted to show you a contraption I built. It's called the social distance thing. So this is, so the point cloud scan is a funny one, because you architects and computer scientists out there will know that there are things called 3D scanning and LiDAR scanning. And I wanted to explore with my colleague, Dio, who called me up one morning and said, Tom, I got a cloud scanner. Do you want to help map the city? And I'm like, yeah, I want to help map the city. And so we just ran around with this tripod, and this device would shoot lasers up to 100 meters and capture and map out the surfaces it hit. So there were about 3 million dots per second that were shot out, and very quickly you could digitize the entire city like a big laser scanner. And this was really interesting for me, so I want to kind of explore this space a bit deeper. And this kind of goes back to a lot of this, a lot of research that was done over the centuries. I think mapping things out helps people and policymakers and designers really understand truths and origins and things like this. And so I thought this sort of was an inspiration point, which was the 1854 cholera outbreak, where they would just kind of start saying where did this problem come from, and you could do that spatially. And when you have things mapped out spatially, then we could relate to the causes and the origins of these kinds of crises in this case. So this is Dio and I running through the Rijksmuseum, which is the Royal Museum of Art in the city of Amsterdam, where I live. And within just a few minutes, you could just plunk that tripod down and start kind of mapping everything that it could capture. And it's a wonderful canvas to work with, to start understanding a one-to-one digital scale model of the space that you're occupying. And the technologies are getting so quick and so fast right now, and the UX, UI, the interface and how we engage these things is getting easier and easier. So I wanted to start thinking about how we could use these kinds of technologies to tackle some bigger issues. And when I always use Bob Ross as the inspiration, because when you have a blank canvas, what do you paint? What's the first thing you do? What's the second thing you do? And you can build up these layers of this kind of tabula rasa, this kind of clean slate. And I kind of wanted just to get really kind of artistic and experimental with the point cloud scan. So what I wanted to do is I'll get into this a little bit later, but we're on the Marinetrein Amsterdam, which is inner city living laboratory for future sustainable living environments. And we're collecting all sorts of data about soil moisture, evaporation rates, traffic impacts, pedestrian bicyclists entering, exiting, the water quality, water temperatures, the air quality, and sound. And I wanted to get beyond these stupid bar graphs and line charts and really start thinking about these things kinds of spatially. So with the point cloud scan that we within just an afternoon, we're able to document the entire base, which is about 1 square mile as an innovation campus. But I wanted to show the public what kinds of data that we're collecting in these things. So for the first time, you could actually have a dialogue with the public of not just what these sensors are doing, but why we're doing it, and make it more spatially kind of make it hyper local or context. You could see these kinds of the data in its location, and you could in its context, so that you could start understanding what these technologies, these sensors, meters, devices, whatever they are, how are these things improving your life? How are these things improving our city? And so when you have this kind of digital twin, you're able to kind of have this wonderful online and offline reality of what is the digital reality. The digital reality is completely invisible and not accessible to the public. So when you start visualizing it in a way, in a beautiful way, in a Bob Ross kind of way, then you can actually start making it more relevant and relatable and accessible and to the public. And this is just a kind of simple demo that I thought would be interesting to share with you guys. The next project started it started in January, but it really started kind of kicking in during the lockdown. And this is our ambition to explore the world's first open source crowd monitor. It sounds like a mouthful, but it's basically if we're developing technologies for the city, those technologies need to be free and transparent and legitimate and accessible. So we want to make whatever we built shareable and free for other cities to take over and try out in their own districts or neighborhoods and streets and squares. The reason why we did this was we had the assignment to create a digital perimeter to monitor the crowds entering and exiting the arena, which is 50,000 stadium for the Ajax football team, because we were hosting the UEFA Cup, which is the European Football Championship leagues this summer. We also had 4 million people planned later this summer to come for the tall ships. We had the Grand Prix. There are over 300 large-scale public events all around the city of Amsterdam. So we needed a kind of solution that would help create insights to those event organizers or the operational managers of traffic in and around these spaces. So an open source monitor in this case is helping the innovation office develop open source kinds of solutions so that other cities don't need to make these things from scratch or pay expensive vendor lock-in enterprise accounts for these things, that it could all be free and easy. We're using computer vision, so using the existing infrastructures of cameras and then anonymizing the data, or i.e. the video that we're capturing in a way and storing it in a safe way. We're doing these things in a living lab experiment so that we could get feedback from the public, how they feel about these kinds of very invasive technologies. Cameras are the most invasive technology known to mankind, so we need to do things super ethically, super responsibly, and equitably. So we came up with stories about ensuring that all of the data, all of the video that we would be collecting would be anonymized. It would be hyper-local in the sense that we're capturing it locally, we're storing it locally, we're processing locally, and we're sharing the data locally. And then we would be able ultimately to come up with a kind of real-time monitor where people could actually see infographics of what's happening around them. So since last year, we've been doing lots of research on camera or computer vision with cameras. So that's YOLO and object for those computer geeks out there. That would be object detection, that would be AI, that would be deep learning, using whole sorts of different data sets to train the cameras to recognize certain things. So I have 5 live cameras right now. There's going to be some more coming, and I've plunked them in around kind of different areas of the marina terrain. And this living lab is giving us footages of footbridges, of waterfronts, of swimming areas, of picnic areas, and squares. So it's a nice little mini cross section of any city, so we could study these technologies in a little bit more detail. This is a kind of a bird's eye view of the marina terrain, this inner city living laboratory for future sustainable environments. I think Monique and Katrin have been here a few times. They can tell you more about it, but there's only 2 entrances and exits, so it makes it quite secure. It's private property owned by the military is still here on the lower half, and the upper half is just a kind of innovation campus. So you're working with lots of interesting characters like MIT, Boston, TU Delft, and they're going to be testing autonomous boats here shortly, autonomous shuttles going back and forth. And here we can test these kinds of things very, very safely and securely without upsetting the public, because once the public enters this area, they're automatically notified that they're in an experimentation zone. So they're all part of the experiments, whether they like it or not. This is one time lapse that we did last week for one of the public holidays, but you can see that in the age of Corona, that's kind of dangerous what happens there. And you see that people disappear quickly because the police chased everybody away because it was really way too overcrowded. And we needed to kind of really start thinking about solutions of how to monitor the difference between the policy of safe distancing versus the practice of safe distancing. This is another example of another camera that we have where the red, you see that obviously someone's just within the 1.5 safe social distance zone, and the green people are okay. So what we can do here is start developing a kind of health score of public space. So the durations of those reds, the moments they happen. And what you then do is create a kind of dashboard that of course, nobody sees the footage, but the computers themselves are calculating the distances between the objects that they're detecting in a 1.5 diameter. And then from there, we can start monitoring safe practices in public space. This is another example of that. In the Vondel Park, which is the old Victorian garden in Center City, very, very intensely used. But here you can see a kind of mock-up of how the safe distancing will be, not only how it works. So in other words, the red frames that you see, the object detection zones, are too close together, whereas the greens are okay. And then you can start visualizing that in an iconographic way, so that as the people enter public space, they can actually make decisions whether or not they are comfortable of entering areas with a good health score or a bad health score. And that kind of works like this. So you've got a super local server that's storing all of the data, so it doesn't go to Google or Facebook or Amazon Web Services. It's hyper local. It's on our own secure VPN network. And what the algorithms are doing is just abstracting we're training the data, we're training the cameras to recognize people. And then in the background, the processing is just counting things and creating heat maps. And then on the right here, you see Rosa, who is a facility manager at the Marineterrein, and we're creating new screens as public dashboards so that people, when they walk in, they can see how busy it is in certain areas and distribute themselves more evenly through the city to ensure, safety and security and health. So rather than the Asian model where they're tracking and monitoring and they're penalizing people for breaking quarantine rules and showing QR codes and going into their contact lists to see who they're in contact with. We just want to make sure that people are informed about what's going on, just in simple numbers, and then they can make a choice. They have a choice, and that's important. So rather than issuing fines and tickets from the police, the people can make that decision themselves. So this is another diagram of how it works. So you have an open source computer vision that's counting, it sees a crowd, but then it's translating that into simple numbers. There's other ways of doing it where you would have different stores, like DIY stores, for example, is the first. So in other words, what do you guys have in the US? The building supply stores, I forget what they're called.
Home Depot.
The Home Depot guys, or even supermarkets. There's now people that give you a shopping cart, and then they count you, and then they can also tell you not only outside but what's happening inside as well. And since the governments are owning this, that there's assurance if you're on anonymity, you're not going to be used. Your personal data is protected. but you can also start visualizing the whole digital rights thing I'll get into, but it's important because we're in this new era now where you're, at least in Europe, where you have this very strict GDPR compliance, which is the General Data Protection Acts. I think California has these, but they're very, very strict laws that protect our digital rights, which is a human right. 100 years ago, women and blacks fought for the right to vote. 100 years later, we have the right to be anonymous. And so these are the kinds of concepts that we're working on with these technologies. And this is just another idea of the dashboards can collect all of these different sources and visualize it in a way for your smartphone, for a web app, for a smart sign on the street, so that people can make informed choices. And so the user cases are like, if I'm a traffic manager, that I can use this information to close locations that are getting too dangerous or too popular. If I'm a police officer, you definitely need to know if there's safe practice of social distancing in their areas. Or if you're old, you use the dashboard to make decisions of what parts of the cities are okay to visit right now and do shopping or go to the pharmacy or not. And then as the terraces, cafes, hotels open up, that the owners can actually use the open source technology to monitor safe behavior. And the last example is just a crazy one. This is another open source project. It's called the social distancing thing. I think if you go to my website, you'll certainly find the parts to build it. If you go to another guy, I think his name's Harm down in Rotterdam, and he shows you it's kind of a cookbook of how you build it. But this was just kind of like a quarantine project, father, son. My 16-year-old son and I just built this thing in an afternoon. Then we went to the Marina to start mapping out what is 1.5 meters in different areas, right? So on sidewalks and boardwalks, on docks, on bridges, on paths, on picnic tables. So we could really start kind of really visualizing what 1.5. So in this case, this is a dock where everybody goes swimming and it's too small. The picnic table, yeah, maybe that's also too small. And it was just a fun way to start the discussion about, as we're entering back into reality, the new norm is completely different, and we need to be conscious about how we're going to be engaging one another, albeit from a distance. These aren't projects I'm working on, but Anne, Katrine, and Monique have been here. This is just across the water from us. Literally, I can see it here from my window. It's about 100 yards away. But this is these were old greenhouses that have been retrofitted to serve very intimate dinners for couples. And so, by opening the doors to these small little greenhouses, you can create a very unique experience, which becomes something special and memorable, but also safe. And so I thought this would be a fun example of how we here in the city of Amsterdam are tackling these kinds of issues on a social level, but also design level and a health level. This is this morning. Again, we're in a living lab, so you never know what you're going to get. But this some clever guy taught a robot machine to make circles to map out safe social distancing locations on the public picnic area, so that you can evenly find a safe spot inside the circle. And this is I think a video. So the robot's just kind of trained via GPS just to go around and around. He's not painting here, but this is what the crazy thing looks like. But I think it's important just to kind of again, these things help us check the differences between the policy of social distance versus the practice. So now that you have all of these circles plotted out all over the public green, do people behave and adhere to the restrictions and stay within their bounds? Don't know. You saw from the last video here, I think it was, yeah, this one. that it can get really scary really quickly. It's not to say that, you know, no one here's wearing gloves or masks, but they're all pent up and they're all frustrated and they want to be social. We are social, but then how do we create those interfaces in our cities, in our parks, in our streets, squares, so that we can facilitate being social, but also being safe at the same time. Anyway, that was I only have a half hour. I could talk about a half a dozen other crazy projects I'm working on, but I want to make sure that I got to brainstorm with you and spitball and think of, yeah, what this new space is that we've just created, and how do we claim that space as designers, as programmers, as policymakers, to really create a corona-friendly kind of return to this new norm. So that was it.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. I keep trying to find my reactions button here. That's the applause thing is sort of not worked out, I think, in Zoom yet. That's still
okay.
Can be improved.
Looks cool.
Thank you very much. So I think it's really interesting to look at that duality, or maybe it's even three parts of policy versus practice, but also policing versus tolerating. And it looks to me like, or it seems apparent that the Netherlands have a lot less space to experiment with. And one concern is that in the US especially, that we're going back to needing a lot more space. We were just we had sort of architecturally and urbanistically increased density and made things work maybe in a way that allows more people to use similar resources. And now my sense is we're going back to bigger is better, or the best is, if you have a ton of space, you obviously feel safest. And that, from what you're showing, is not really the necessary strategy, because there are technologies out there that would allow a much more smart and clever way to interact with those things. So that's kind of a quick reaction of mine. But I do want to hand it over to our audience here, and you can type in the chat or also just unmute yourselves. Let's try all channels here. Feedback, questions, thoughts from your end. And Tom, I don't know if you can see the chat. I can read it as well.
Yes. Bradley Boulet. Amsterdam and Copenhagen are well known for almost eliminating car usage and replacement for multiple types of transportation, such as bikes, walking, and the metro. Do you think Amsterdam was successful as it was because they were able to connect the government and communities with one common goal, communication, or what other factor do you think allowed change to thrive so well? Wow, that's a great question. As Anne, Katrin, and Monique know, that when you come to Amsterdam, the first thing you notice are all of the bicycles anyway. So that was always a part of our infrastructure and our heritage and our culture, that 40% of the people that are going to work are commuting by bicycle. And that's because we're frugal, because that's the most efficient way to move through the city. So Amsterdam is literally the same footprint as Boston, with almost the exact same population, 850,000, but we're as flat as a pancake, right? We don't have those sky rises and things where you come in from the suburbs and you park your car and you go to work. Everything is sandwiched together. But it has been very eerie during the lockdown. I'm working late these days because I'm at the epicenter of design and technology and policy and public space, and so all of a sudden I'm working long hours and I'm biking through the city, and it's a ghost town. And it's weird because I've lived here for 20 years and I've never seen it without tourists or people at night. It's always a bustling city, and it's really strange to see it without so many people. And I think what I'm seeing as trends right now is that there's snapshots of London, there's snapshots of Paris, where bicyclists are really reclaiming this space because there's no more cars. And the air is wonderful. The skies are crystal blue, and it's not as busy anymore. So And you see, when I'm biking home, you see people reclaiming the parking lots and putting out their picnic tables and really reclaiming these spaces. And I think that's a really powerful thing, is that this is our space. And so what that means is, like in Amsterdam, we're 850,000 people, but we have to share that with 9 million tourists. So now we got the tourists removed from the equation, and it's a wonderful time to be in Amsterdam right now, because you really get to meet your neighbors again. You really get to engage on things that you wouldn't normally able to see with before. And so that I hope that answers your question. Is the biking was always a part of our culture. It's always been there. And I think what's happening now is that, since, I don't know how Wentworth is dealing with this, but the universities have said that students are not allowed to take public transport, but they still have to come to class now that we're reopened. So what you're going to see is, you're going to see bike sales go through the roof. You're going to see e-bike sales go through the roof, because those distances are for many students a lot greater. So those are investments people keep, and then you're almost forcing the transition to fossil fuel CO2 neutral scenarios much quicker. So it's wonderful to see that, how quickly things are changing for the better. And it does come down to communication, but that's also a kind of, I'm spoiled because I'm living in the Netherlands, and there's very good cooperation from the government. There's huge commitments from the government. They're communicating really clearly, and everybody is Dutch, because we live below the sea. So back in the day, if you were a farmer and you didn't maintain your part of the dike, everybody would die. So there's a very collective social spirit about making sure that everybody's okay. So that, coming with good governance and good society or social kinds of protections, you can manage these things easier than, I think, in America, which you have much more liberties and independence. You can't tell me what I can't do. Here in the Netherlands, it's like, we got to do this together to work. So.
Hey Tom, can we move you to the meeting room?
Yeah, I got to move. I'll be right back.
You can also see the room is empty.
It sounds like you guys are having a party, so you're open.
Yeah, they're cooking bitterball right now.
My favorite dish. So maybe I can add a question as you're walking. You might still be able to hear us. So in the previous session with Larry Chan, who you might know, architect and urbanist in Boston, who what came up a lot was sort of this question of inequity. And if you have these smart city systems, and I was really glad to see in Wandel Park that there were displays mounted to show people who don't have the cell phone app, or who don't necessarily have access to all this technology, to still provide them with the information. And so I'm curious what you think about the question of how inequity and how sort of making things worse for people who have very little access to start with comes in, and how do you address that? How do you, in your projects, think about sort of the diverse social strata and financial strata and sort of diverse users who might actually not engage with that? To us, this sounds all really cool. My mom could care less. She doesn't want to have a cell phone app.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. So you're talking about the democratic and equitable practices of the smart city kinds of solutions, and I think there's a few lenses to look through. One is right here behind me. It's in Dutch, but basically, you need to have a clear. Everybody has to have a clear vision about what are the values and principles you want to protect as a city, because you don't want to become there are a bunch of red lines that we're about to cross, and we'll never be able to go back from. And these guys are making so much noise. So is it the Black Mirror city? Is it the Blade Runner city? Is it this kind of dystopian 1984 surveillance state kind of city? But we need to make sure that we're the values and principles I'm talking about are inclusivity. They're about is what we're doing legitimate, and can we control it? Is it human centric? Is it Is it responsible and controllable again? Is it open and transparent? Is it for everybody, by everybody? Those are the values that you want to kind of first identify as a collective, as a society, and then you can look at it through the technical sides or the social sides or the security sides. But I think that first I think everybody needs to have a discussion about what are those principles and values we want to protect ourselves. And so in terms of smart city participation, for me, it's all about inclusivity and engagement with the public, because right now, if I were to go to Boston and talk about smart city, or even in here in Amsterdam talk about smart city, 95% of the population doesn't have a clue, right? They're just kind of like, whatever. And that's, for me, really dangerous, because there's lots of things that are happening right now with cities that cities aren't the architects. They're not the young computer programmers that you have right now on Zoom. They're not trained for that. And all of a sudden they're dealing with all of these threats like Corona, like Uber, like Airbnb, that are radically transforming cities faster than the officials who are elected to protect us can ever anticipate, and nor are they trained. So we need to help the city makers design better policies to protect those values and principles.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think we're looking in the US to strengthen those ties. And Boston has some good initiatives going to get policymakers and communities together, but it's definitely something where we need more input. So anybody else besides Bradley, questions? You can unmute yourself or just type them, or also just some comments or thoughts.
Yeah, I'll comment. I think for me, looking into the fall, a lot of people have talked about like transportation and like, what does that mean when we go back? And I think like, it's really interesting to me because, Wentworth hasn't made their official decision yet, but, I know personally for me, like, I don't know that I feel like that I would want to live on campus in such small spaces. The flu like rips through the dorms already. So like, I don't know that I want that, but so I was looking into commuting, but it's interesting because, it's so hard to get a train on a regular, day that isn't so overpacked. So I'm just curious to maybe see what you think, or like what you've seen others experience about, kind of what is the plan for that? Are they going to add more trains, or are people just going to try and like hope they can get into work on time and like figure it out?
I mean, for me, it's easy because like we have such a mature infrastructure for bike paths and bike lights and bike lanes, and it's like half of the traffic in the city are bicyclists, and there's an etiquette and everybody understands the rules of the road, and it's fine. I think the US is up for a big challenge because I don't see anybody taking the metro or the subways anytime soon. So what's the alternative? On the other side, I see that as a wonderful opportunity to really advance the future mobility scenarios in terms of a cleaner, more equitable use of the streets and sidewalks. As long as if it's fast and it's convenient, it will work. If it's too much trouble, then people I think will just opt to stay home, and then you're back into the whole how does teleworking or remote working work. And what's interesting for me is I'm watching very, very carefully about what, let's say, Silicon Valley is doing right now. Twitter and Google have just announced that everybody stays home until the end of 2020, right? And that's a very ambitious goal. And what's going to be interesting is if the productivity levels stay the same, or maybe it drops down to 90%, but not 100%. But maybe it is 100% because they don't have to commute anymore, and they do stay at home. Then they find a new routine, and then all of a sudden we have a new crisis because then you have all of these derelict and abandoned office buildings and office parks that no one's occupying. So it's a really strange space that I hope you students are really going to be exploring soon, because very quickly you will see what's going to happen in terms of the mobility, the occupancies rates of these derelict office buildings, stadiums, sporting events. All of these things are turned upside down right now. We need to think very, very creatively and very comprehensively about what kinds of things are simple, that don't take too much effort, that just work, and then start whatever does work, you replicate that over and over and over again, and don't overthink it. Don't spend, you know, a month thinking about stuff. You want to be testing concepts tomorrow.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And what I'm seeing here, so I'm in Ipswich, not in Boston, but one big attraction here is Crane Beach. And now you actually have to get a ticket. So instead of driving up there and paying $20 to get your car parked, you have to go online, and if you don't have a ticket, you don't get in. And they limit the numbers, they limit the time slots, and that could be the same on the commuter rail. It could just be ticketed. You get your spot, you reserve a seat, and there you go. Nobody next to you. So I think this sort of pre-organizing and having to make a plan rather than just go somewhere is also something that we're seeing a lot, and that can be technology driven. It can be that can have all kinds of formats. But you know, it sounds like a pain to have to sort of now get a ticket for every single activity that you possibly.
Well, it just means it means you have to be more German, right? In the sense of being plan. Let's plan and let's coordinate and let's do things accordingly. Which is might take an extra time, but then you're really starting to map out your day differently. And I think that's the first one of feedbacks of like the corona is, you know, how do you navigate this new space? It's going to take much more planning, much more coordination, much more collaboration, much more dialogue. But what I'm seeing, the discrepancies between the US and Europe right now is that it has to be a greater deal of responsibility from everybody consistently, because there's a lot of mixed messages coming from the federal government in the US right now, which is very confusing. And if you don't have that consistency, nothing's going to work. So in other words, you may be following the rules, but if the guy sitting next to you or standing next to you in line isn't following those rules, why do you bother? And things will just keep spiraling out of control. And I think that at least in the Netherlands, there's more of a kind of social responsibility to adhere to as best they can to some of these new regulations.
Right. No, I agree. I don't see any new questions in the chat, but I have one. So like just really going back to the future of the city and using some broad brushstrokes, what is your vision of the future city right now? What do you see happening on in an amazing space, and maybe also in a very scary space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just, the city for me has to be more responsive. It has to be more responsible. It has to be more livable. And for me, I'm mixing my common denominator for all the projects I'm working on is space, right? So the world is organized in three different ways. It's time, or it's money, or it's space. But space is the real human kind of denominator. And as we start planning and building or designing or testing our future cities, we want to make sure that it's equitable, it's fair, it's responsible, it's sustainable, it's resilient. So all of those kinds of things don't have to do with technology by itself. I think it's just innovation. I think it's just that kind of collective decisions about what kinds of cities do we want to live in, and we test those concepts together so we can constantly guide ourselves in the right direction versus, oh shit, what did we do now? Google just find me something for I did crossing the street, which is what's happening in China, right? So you have lots of models to look at right now. You've got China as this kind of surveillance state. You got US as this surveillance capitalism. And you have to really kind of be much more proactive about what kind of space do you want to occupy, or do you want to create? And it's all hands on deck right now. We have really, really important work to do because otherwise it's going to be governments that dictate or corporations that dictate. And either of those scenarios won't work for us in general.
Agreed. So Bradley came back with a question that asks, what part of everyday life do you think will change from this pandemic? What part of your life have you seen yourself trying to redesign and rethink?
Bradley, another good one. The first thing is like when I'm watching Netflix and I see people hugging and shaking hands, I'm like, oh my God, I remember that. We used to do that, you know? And that's only 2 months ago, that lifestyle that we had of, I mean, we're human. Like these guys cooking bitter balls and drinking beer next to me right now, probably are not adhering to the social distancing, but we're washing our hands and, you know, we're all biking to work. So we know that we've reduced the rates. But we as humans miss that kind of contact and that kind of that social space that we can't really reclaim because we have to keep 1.5 meters from each other, and it's a very awkward thing for humans. And so that's the first change that I've noticed, is that the stuff that we need, we can't have, like that not intimacy, but just that kind of like high fives and the handshakes and the hugs and that stuff. I think we need in any environment, whether that's urban or rural or whatever. And trying to redesign and rethink is basically creating those kinds of those future parks, sidewalks, squares, these are our common spaces. We're commoners, and these are our commons. So we need to protect those spaces, because if we end up in a scenario where Asia is rewarding you or penalizing you, not just on your online behavior, but your offline behavior, what you're doing in the streets, you're being tracked and monitored every waking moment, every breath you're taking, you're being tracked and monitored. And then we lose everything. So the future city is really kind of trying to bring the public voice and opinion back into the policy making. So that, and what I'm doing is just trying to collect as much data, which becomes facts and evidence, to make informed decisions. A lot of people right now, especially in the 100 years ago or the last century, it was like, oh, I think there's a big problem here, and I'm basically saying, oh really? Is it a problem? Is it really a problem, or do you think it's a problem? And data and facts can now change minds, and we can actually show, we can visualize things in a way to change minds, change perspectives, and as long as we're doing that collectively, we'll have a more positive environment to live and work and raise kids and all these other things. If we're just monitored 24/7, then that's not going to work at all either.
I have a question, but first I want to ask. I want to thank you for joining us. And my question is, basically, after this situation, many fields, including architecture, have started to think about the pandemic and this whole situation, not just the doctors and science. So how do you balance for architects and designers? How do you balance between designing spaces that deals with social distancing and pandemic, and then regular spaces? Do we need to always think about this? Like maybe 10 years from now, do we need our parks and the city needs to be ready for stuff like that, or do we need to have it just in case?
Yeah, I think the reality is that Corona is going to be here for 2 years. So I don't know what year you're in at Wentworth, but you're about to graduate into a brand new world, and that your generation's got a lot of fixing to do, which is great because there's demand, and the demand is creativity, innovation, thinking outside the box, visualizing. Architects have all of those skills to engineer things, to design things, to write things, to visualize things, render things, animate things. There's so much stuff that you guys have as a toolkit to tackle as an arsenal to fight this new battle. And 1.5 meters, or in the US case 6 feet, is the new unit, right? The new metric. And so for the next 2 years, you really got to be thinking around 6 feet as a block. especially in public space. And but I think that this new world, this new norm, is going to require really talented and passionate future city makers like you to really push the envelope, to explore and test. So what architects should be doing now is not master planning things, because master plans take too long. What you should be doing is rapid prototyping stuff, proving stuff that works over and over. And if it works, you scale it and you replicate it and you keep moving on. But if you have an idea, you got to test it out. And more importantly, architects need to make things rougher, make things dirtier. Don't make it so beautiful. It's not about perfection and beauty. It's about it's not about the beautiful object anymore. It's about functional spaces that you can create that tackle all of these issues of security, health, education, you name it. You guys have to own this now.
Good question. Thank you.
I have another question for you. I know that, in our spheres and how we work across the city and with different disciplines is oftentimes dependent on serendipitous collisions. And those typically happen when we go to events or when we're just, meeting someone in their office spaces and then someone else happens to be there. And this is how you kind of multiply your connection points. And this is also where impromptu ideas are being created. So how did you figure out for yourself, how to do this in the online world right now when you're much more removed?
That's a great one. Yeah, so there's a lot of kind of there's a lot of formal stuff that we're doing, a lot of informal stuff we're doing. And so the spontaneity is really the magic. And I remember last year when we did the Reclaiming the Space workshop with Wentworth, it was really important that we had teams that were diverse so that you didn't just have designers hanging out with designers, business developers, with the business developers, communities, community leaders, engineers, that we mixed the bag. And then from all of those different perspectives, you could come up with a much more robust and much more comprehensive solution to the problem because you're listening to different people. And I think that's one of the most important things. Online, virtually, digitally, you can, in theory, do that easier, right? Because you don't have to get in your car, you don't have to go anywhere. You can just create these kinds of formats like you're doing right now, right? I'm talking to 30 students from Boston about Dutch concepts, and you don't have to buy a plane ticket, go to Logan Airport, arrive at Schiphol, get jet lagged. We can share these things more easily and more effectively, I would say. But how you translate those insights back to the locality, back to your local context, back to your built environment is up to you. But I think that sharing knowledge right now is the key. So that whole I think to fight this whole Corona or COVID-19 thing it will come down to sharing data, sharing those models, sharing those insights to see what works. And that collaboration needs to be consistent, needs to be all the time, so that you can see what happens in Copenhagen versus Amsterdam versus Singapore versus Boston versus whatever. You're going to see things are working and whatnot, and the data that we exchange, and if it's open data and it's free and it's accessible and it's transparent, we can really start kind of making quick decisions based on good information and not bad information. So I think that's the advantage of the situation that we're in is this new urgency to share more and learn more as quick as we can, because this is a new paradigm shift, and we need more perspectives, and especially the creative ones.
Thank you, Tom.
So the intentional assets and the planning actually comes much more to play, right? Because you are now suddenly much more reliant on that production being on your end and that outreach being on your end potentially, and that nurturing of those relationships requires much more intent than in the past. And so I think that's a very important message. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and just working off that point too, I think that the architects have inherently all of those skills. They just need to apply them differently now, right? So it's not about solving the spatial kinds of criteria and requirements. It's really using all of those things in their arsenal in a completely different way. It's going to be much more temporal. It's going to be much more cheaper. It's going to be faster. It's going to be completely different. And I think that's the point, is that the corona is forcing this urgency right now to not do it the traditional way, but a completely new way.
I think that's where this FutureLab has an opportunity to test some of these things that you talked about. We have 7 teams. We have people who are researching right now and sort of finding innovations in all the topics that we've been raising this week. And I would encourage the teams to see yourselves as, you know, as a business, as an enterprise. A lot of you talked about that you want to have your own firm, no matter if you're an architect or computer scientist or applied math major. You have an entity, you have a group, so you can run with it, and we're guiding you with some things, but you also can feel free to take that dynamic and become much more active. So Tom, you're always an inspiration, and even more so during COVID. We need you every week, basically, so we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
This was so inspiring and fun. Good to see you. I want to travel to Schiphol and have those bitterballen anyway, so I will do that as soon as possible.
I'll have a bitterballen or 2 in your honor.
Okay.
The call. Yeah.
Well, seriously, yesterday in preparation for this talk, I was looking at home prices for kennel houses in Amsterdam, and I realized that this is not doable anytime soon.
No. I think the corona's got to rip its ride itself through the city before the real estate prices drop down. But it's still a hot spot right now, and it is a beautiful city, and it's beautiful not because it's aesthetically beautiful, but it's beautiful to give me all sorts of licenses and liberties to do things in this city to help other cities. So that's what I love about Amsterdam. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll keep you posted on what comes out of the teams and the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
Here. So,
my last bit of advice is working off of what you're talking about, this entrepreneurship. Whatever you guys think of, don't overthink it. Just make it and test it with real people in real spaces, and those insights will change your mind completely. But do it quickly and to get the feedback as quick as you can. And I think that interface and those frictions we need to be designing now.
Thank you. So much, thank you very much. See you very soon. And
all right, I hope so. I can't wait.
And tell the family hi.
I will do. They're in Germany. I'm
there you go.
This weekend, so yeah. All right, see you guys.
Bye.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.